This morning, I called a special meeting of the Executive Council. The Chief Executive and Council decided to invoke the Emergency Regulations Ordinance to enact a prohibition on face covering regulation. Now, this has been discussed for a long time in the committee as the anti-mask legislation. This regulation will come into effect tomorrow, the 5th of October. Why do we need to have this piece of regulation? It's because in the past 4 months, we've seen that almost all protesters who carried out vandalism and violence covered their face. The purpose was to hide their identity and evade the law, and they have become more and more daring. So we believe the prohibition on face covering regulation will be an effective deterrent to radical behavior, and it will also help the police in enforcing the law. In a moment, the Secretary for Justice will be briefing you on the content of the regulation. We note that many have openly expressed support for an anti-mask legislation. They have pointed out that in other countries there is a similar law. But I note also there are people against the enactment of an anti-mask legislation, and they've questioned certain legal principles and they have expressed concerns. In a moment, I will invite the Secretary for Justice to give a response. Now, what I would like to say to the people of Hong Kong is this. It is not an easy decision to legislate to ban masks, but given the current situation in Hong Kong, this is a necessary decision. I would like to stress 4 points. Firstly, now, what we're invoking is the Emergency Regulations Ordinance. And under that, we are enacting the prohibition in face covering regulation. But that does not mean Hong Kong is in a state of emergency. The Chief Executive and Council has not declared Hong Kong having entered a state of emergency. It's just that the ordinance gives powers to the Chief Executive and Council that when we believe there is a danger to public order, then we could act accordingly. Now, I don't think anyone will question that in Hong Kong, we have already seen the scenario of public order being endangered. So therefore, we could invoke the Emergency Regulation Ordinance, and then the Chief Executive and Council could make any regulations that are in line with public interest. So I must stress that, yes, we are using the Emergency Regulations Ordinance, and then the regulation we are enacting is a prohibition on face covering. But it doesn't mean Hong Kong is in a state of emergency. But at the same time, the situation we're seeing in Hong Kong is does satisfy this requirement of endangering public order. And secondly, this regulation aims to end violence and return us to peace. I believe that is the aspiration of all in Hong Kong. And thirdly, the regulation will target those who use violence. We understand there may be other people who need to wear a mask or cover their face because of a legitimate need. That's why in the regulation there are exemption clauses where there is a reasonable defense. The needs of these people would be taken care of. So we believe, therefore, the regulation has struck the right balance. In a moment, the Secretary for Justice or the Secretary for Security will be giving a detailed explanation. Finally, I would like to say this is a regulation. So the nature is that it is a subsidiary legislation. It is a piece of subsidiary legislation by negative vetting. That means when the Legislative Council resumes on the 16th of October, the SAR government will table this piece of legislation to the Legislative Council for consideration. Now, finally, I hope the public will support and understand what we're doing. And I appeal to the public that we should all say no to violence. We must work together to let Hong Kong go back to the normal Hong Kong, a place where we can call home. I and my ruling team will continue to go by the 4 initiatives I announced earlier. Through dialogue and through more studies, hopefully we could identify the deep-rooted problems in Hong Kong and that we could respond accordingly.
In English.
'Cause 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 '
Protests arising from the Fugitive Offenders Bill have continued for nearly 4 months now. Over this period, protesters' violence has been escalating and has reached a very alarming level in the past few days, causing numerous injuries and leading Hong Kong to a chaotic and panic situation.
So you've just been listening there to Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam announcing this emergency legislation to ban the use of face masks by protesters, as was widely expected. She said that this would come into effect tomorrow, criticizing the protesters for what she called unlawful and unauthorized demonstrations. This is seen as an attempt from the point of view of protesters to try to intimidate them. And we've seen large numbers of them out in the streets in Hong Kong today with their face masks on. Scott Heidler is live in Hong Kong for us there. Scott, as expected there, the chief executive announcing that she was enacting this new emergency law that would take effect from tomorrow, bypassing the legislator under these supposed emergency powers. But as we've been seeing on the streets there, the protesters remain undeterred about all this.
They do house them, absolutely. Yeah, no, she said, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, said that there was a dangerous public order in Hong Kong because of these protests, and she needed to do this to try to restore order here. It's very interesting, you know, this is something that has a law, an emergency law. It dates back to colonial days, and it hasn't been enacted for over 50 years. So she feels as though it's important to try to stop the violence, she said, in Hong Kong by enacting this emergency law. Now, what it is that if the police see anyone who's trying to conceal their identity with a mask, they have the right to go over and tell them to remove it or have it removed by the police. That is what they're doing. That's what's going to move forward, as you said, Hazem, starting tomorrow. Obviously, that is not going to sit well with these protesters whatsoever. They will continue to wear them, they have said. The people here who have been out on the streets in Hong Kong in anticipation of this announcement, they have been out here. They're wearing the masks, you can see. And even before that, even when there were rumblings that this emergency law might be enacted, they have been saying the same thing across the city. Now, what happened today? There was a gathering that started at lunchtime, about 200-300 people in a garden pretty close to where we are. We're in the central financial district right here in Hong Kong. It started small, and it grew to about 500 in this garden, and then they marched about a kilometer to where we are now. There were thousands there. No, it was a route they took is kind of snaking through the urban caverns here with buildings and things and through walkways and shopping malls. And then they gathered here, shutting down this major intersection. And they've been here now for almost 3 hours. So this is something they are taking very seriously, these protesters. What's interesting, Hazem, you know, in the lead up to Carrie Lam's announcement, kind of heard from both sides. The protesters are saying this is only going to make things worse. Like a couple weeks ago, Carrie Lam tried to tamp things down by holding a dialogue with 150 people. That didn't do anything. If anything, it inflamed the protesters more. Protesters are saying that's what this mask law is going to do. She's making this attempt to try to calm things down. They say it's going to have the opposite effect, Hassan.
All right, for the moment, Scott Heidler live for us there in Hong Kong. We will continue to monitor events there.